So shop air quality is obviously one of the biggest health concerns in a shop environment, and that is largely due to airborne sawdust. And so I have tried to minimize that over the years by spending a lot of time and money setting up a very fancy dust collection system. I have dust extractors for pretty much all of my handheld power tools, but even with both of those things, I still get airborne dust here in the shop. And I've used some different commercial air filters over the years, but generally they're underpowered for a shop this size. My shop's about 2,500 square feet. It has 9.5 foot tall ceilings, and that gives me a rough air volume of 24,000 cubic feet. So a typical commercial shop air filter that's rated around 500 CFM will only filter the air in this shop a little over once per hour, which really just isn't enough. The good news is I think I can majorly improve that with a DIY shop air filter cart. It'll be cheaper than the commercially available carts, it'll work better, and best of all, it will be cordless, which is one of the big things that's kept me from building this kind of cart previously, is I did not want to have to drag extension cords around the shop, and that all changed with this new tool, at least new to me, that I found recently. Let me go grab it. So this whole project moved to the top of my to-build list when I found this Milwaukee 18-inch cordless job site fan. And I think by building this whole air filter cart around this cordless fan, it'll mean that I actually use this thing because it'll be very easy to wheel around from station to station as I'm working here in the shop. And let's go ahead and take a look at the design I came up with so we can get to building. So I started the project by designing the air filter cart in SketchUp, and I will have plans available for the cart in case you're interested in building one for yourself. But since the Milwaukee fan is about 21 inches in diameter, I made the cart 2 feet by 2 feet. And this meant I could use 20-inch by 20-inch air filters, and I ended up using MERV 14 air filters for the best possible air filtration. Once I had the design worked out, I started the build by cutting down some strips of plywood using the miter saw and table saw. And I built the cart entirely out of 3/4 inch plywood, and I use scraps, but you'd need a little less than one full sheet of plywood to build a cart like this. The longer strips I'm cutting are the vertical slats, which make up the corners of the cart, and then the shorter strips are the horizontal stretchers. And you can see why this kind of air filter is necessary even with a dust collection blade guard, because cuts like these edge cuts still end up creating a ton of airborne dust. I also needed to remove the guard entirely to cut some of the narrower strips, and even more dust escaped then. Once all the parts were cut down, I could start with assembly, starting with the vertical slats. And I nailed and glued these together to form the outside corners of the cart. I repeated the assembly for the inner frame corners and then set up to drill some pocket holes. I used pocket holes to attach the horizontal stretchers to the vertical pieces, and I could have used something like dowels or dominoes here for a little bit more strength, but I honestly didn't think it needed it. I also added one center pocket hole to the upper and lower slats, which will attach those slats to the top and bottom panels. Next, I marked where the horizontal stretchers needed to attach to the corner assemblies, and I used CA glue to help lock these pieces together, which just helps to keep the pieces from moving around when driving the pocket screws. I grabbed my screws and bit from my newly organized screw storage drawer, and definitely check out that video if you missed it. I am loving having my screws so organized now. I clamped the pieces in place and then drove in the screws, and then I could just repeat the process to attach the second corner. And once that was done, the first side of the outer frame was done. And before moving on, I checked the fit of the inner frame, and everything looked good, so I could assemble the other side of the outer frame. While I'm working, let's take a second to talk about the sponsor of this week's video, Yoshino, and their B4000 SST portable power station. So I've used a lot of power stations over the years, but what makes Yoshino's power stations unique is that they feature solid-state batteries. This not only makes them extremely reliable, but also much lighter than the alternative. For example, this B4000 model can provide 4,000 watts of power and only weighs a little over 50 pounds. The power station also features aluminum handles with soft grips for easy carrying. This B4000 model has 2 built-in wireless charging pads on the top, plus a ton of AC and DC ports so you can charge and power a bunch of different devices. I personally love these kinds of power stations because I can use them as an uninterrupted power supply during the week to power things like computers, networking equipment, and my 3D printers. And then on the weekend, I can take them with me when I'm going camping or doing something else where I might need some backup power. These are also great to have around in case of power outages, and this B4000 can run appliances like microwaves, coffee makers, and even refrigerators, meaning you won't have to throw out a bunch of thawed out food when the power comes back on. 27 hours it'll run my fridge. That's crazy. The best part about these Yoshino power stations is their reliability, with the batteries lasting over 10 years and 4,000 charge cycles. The built-in battery management system will keep the batteries safely and optimally charged, and they come with a 5-year warranty. So if you're interested in picking up a Yoshino power station for yourself, check out the link in my video description below. Thanks again to Yoshino for sponsoring this week's video, and let's get back to the project. I repeated the same process to assemble the inner frame, and I also installed those narrow stretchers on the inner frame at the top and bottom. And I guess the plywood scraps I used were slightly different thicknesses, so the clamps weren't working very well. But I eventually got the first side of the inner frame assembled, and after that was done, I tested the fit again with the filters this time, and thankfully everything looked great. And I did oversize these filter openings slightly to accommodate different filter sizes, since the sizes can vary between 1/4 and 1/2 inch depending on which brand filter you end up buying. With the test fit looking good, I could get the rest of the frame assembled, and I finished building the inner frame and then glued the outer frame to the inner frame. And I had to use a ridiculous number of clamps here, and I probably should have just screwed everything together, but I think it looks a little nicer not to have all of those screw holes visible. I let the glue dry, removed the clamps, and added the last 2 pieces, which were the outer stretchers. And I just glued and stapled those from the inside. With that, the frame was done, so I could cut the top and bottom panels to size, and they were just under 2 feet by 2 feet. I attached the bottom panel to the frame with glue and staples, and then I could go back and add that pocket screw through the narrow cinder stretcher to permanently attach everything. I repeated the process for the top, and with that, the pieces were all assembled, and next I needed to cut the hole for the fan. The controls on this fan are down here, so I think I need to overhang this just slightly so I can easily access the 3-speed switch here, and then I can also use this handle that's built into the fan to help move around the cart, which will be nice. And I'm also going to leave these feet on and make the fan removable with some of the 3D printed clips I'm going to use, so that way if I want to use the fan for something not related to this shop air filter, I can easily just take it off, use it for that, and reinstall it super quick. So I'll go ahead and get the fan positioned, trace my line, and then make the cut with a jigsaw. So after tracing the outline of the fan, I knew I needed to offset the hole inwards, so I marked the center of the hole and then used a compass to mark a smaller hole. Once the line was marked, I drilled a starter hole for the jigsaw blade and then cut the hole with my jigsaw. After making the cut, I double-checked the fit and everything looked good. Next, I wanted to get the cart sanded, and I also decided to add a heavy round over to all the edges so I wouldn't cut myself on the sharp edges when I was wheeling this thing around the shop. I used this Astra-coated 1/2-inch round over bit from Bits and Bits to round over the edges, and I got it installed in my router, set the depth, and got to routing. And I started with the inside of the hole for the fan, and this made it a little easier to install the weather stripping later, since it was easier to mold around a rounded edge rather than a sharp corner. After that, I rounded over the outer edges of the top and bottom panels, and evidently the bag on my dust extractor was full, hence all of the extra dust. And finally, I rounded over the outer corners to wrap up the routing. After routing, I sanded everything with 180 grit sandpaper, breaking any sharp edges on the filter openings so I didn't bang into them later. Once the sanding was done, I went ahead and installed some casters, and I already had these in my hardware drawer, and I just marked the hole locations, pre-drilled, and then installed the casters with 3/4 inch panhead screws. Once they were installed, I went ahead and added a little silicone spray lubricant just to get the casters working a little smoother, and I wiped off any excess and then could flip the cart over, and it seemed to roll really smoothly. So now that the cart is all sanded up and looking good, I am ready to start installing the fan and the filters, and I have a bunch of different hardware to accomplish that. First, I've got this kit I got from 3D Handyman, and I kind of modeled this whole project after one of his builds, but he sells kits for these style of filters, so if you don't want to build one from scratch, go check out his Etsy store, but he also sells 3D printed parts he uses as part of his kits, to be able to build one yourself, and that's what I ended up getting. So the kit comes with these filter clips, so I just screw these on the front. That'll hold the HVAC filters in place. There's also a bunch of other odds and ends, including hold down clips to hold the fan in place, a little wrench to be able to turn the little clips for the filters so you can easily remove and install those. So for 30 bucks, I thought this was money well spent. I certainly could have modeled this stuff myself and 3D printed it myself, but that would have taken me hours of work, and these parts look like they're great quality. So to actually seal the filters to the cart, I have a mixture of weather stripping foam. I actually oversized the openings for these filters. The ones I bought were kind of a cheaper brand off of Amazon, but at some point in the future, I'll probably upgrade to the 3M versions, which I think are much higher quality. They're also a little bit larger, so I wanted to make sure to leave room for that. Next, I could get the weather stripping installed, and this weather stripping was 1 inch wide by 1/8 of an inch thick. And I just cut it to fit, making sure there were no gaps where the pieces met up in the corners. Next, I could install the filter clips, but first I needed to decide on the layout. So 7 clips per filter, I think. 58 clips, 8 filters. So I think something like this orientation. And this one will be my template, 4, 4, 4, 4, and then centered. So one of the nifty features of this kit is this little wrench that makes it super easy to add or remove your filters. And once they're all turned, take the filter out, good to go. So in my configuration, the fan is gonna be pulling the air in through the filters and then up and out of the top. So I wanna make sure the arrows on these filters are pointed in because that's the direction of the airflow. All right. After installing the rest of the weather stripping and filter clips, I could go ahead and add the weather stripping around the hole for the fan. So now I need to look at how I'm gonna mount this fan to this filter cart. And so the kit from 3D Handyman came with a few different mounting options. It was designed for a different fan, but they seem like they should work pretty well for me. The first of the 2 options is this little thumb screw, and this will allow me to remove the fan very easily because I can mount it and then turn it to basically unlock it and lift it out of place. And then the other option is for more permanent mounting, another version of this kind of little clip. And I think I'm gonna use a combination of both of these so I can have kind of a hard stop where I want the fan positioned. And then I'll have 1 or 2 of these thumb screws so I can easily remove and reinstall this thing if I wanna use it as a fan. So with the fan on, the filters are pretty much ready to install. I am gonna do one other thing before I do that. But first, before I install the filters, I wanna take a baseline reading of the CFM, which is cubic feet per minute, and that's how much air this fan is able to move. And I wanna take that measurement with no filters installed to get the kind of max CFM of this fan. Then I'm gonna take another measurement with brand new filters installed to see how much the CFM drops with just the new filters. And then that way I have a baseline number that I can kind of keep track of over time. So this is a pretty cheap anemometer. I don't know how accurate it is, but I figure it'll at least give me a baseline number that I can work with. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it on. And so it's set to feet per minute. And then I can turn the fan on. I have it set up in the corded mode, which is a really nice option because my Milwaukee batteries are at my house with my Milwaukee lawnmower. I can go ahead and move the anemometer around over the entire surface of the fan to see where the maximum CFM rating is, and that'll be our baseline number. So that's low, medium, high. So it looks like the max CFM, at least this device recorded, was 1181. So that is a lot lower than the rating that Milwaukee gave this thing. They claimed it was about 3000 CFM. So I'll try it with a cordless battery to see if that makes any difference. I can't really imagine that it would, but at least we have a baseline number with no filters installed. So we can go ahead and start working on getting the filters in. So speaking of the filters, one thing I wanted to try to possibly extend the life of the filters was adding a pre-filter. And the Powermatic air filter that I've been using has something similar to that. It's basically just a metal mesh. So I picked up some of this silk screening material, which is rated in microns. So it is extremely, extremely fine. Will definitely catch a lot of dust. And I think I should be able to just basically cover the front of these filters. So that way I can vacuum off the bulk dust from time to time and hopefully extend the life of the filters. To install the pre-filter mesh, I used a rotary cutter to cut the mesh and then used gaffer's tape to attach the mesh to the filters. And so this is the finished result. It was really easy to add this pre-filter material. It was only about 10 bucks and it should easily cover all 8 of these filters, and I think I could probably even reuse it, although I don't think I'm gonna wanna deal with trying to peel off this gaffer's tape. I'll probably just buy some more screen printing mesh when it's time to replace these, but I think for the time being, this is a really good option to extend the life of these filters. And before installing all of that pre-filter material, I want to go ahead and do another baseline test to see if that pre-filter material impacts the CFM. It probably will, because it's just another thing that the fan is going to have to move the air through. So let's go ahead and test it with 8 filters without the pre-filter material and see what kind of CFM ratings we get there. All right, so I got all the filters installed. These are all brand new 20 by 20 MERV 14 rated filters. So let's see what the impact on the CFM was. Okay, so not bad at all. This is saying 1083, so that's only about 100 CFM drop, so a little less than 10%. So I will definitely take that. I think that is pretty minimal. And so hopefully with that pre-filter material, I can keep these filters pretty clean and keep that CFM drop to a minimum. So let's go ahead and get the rest of the pre-filters on, and then we can reinstall all the filters and take the final reading. All right, so this read at 1,024 cubic feet per minute, so that is a very minimal drop versus just the filters with no pre-filter, so I think that's great. I do think these are gonna help a lot. I guess we'll see over time. But now that everything's installed and set up, let's go ahead and test this thing out. I bought some fun stuff to visualize this whole filter cart working, so let's go ahead and check that out. So I ended up buying a fog machine. Let me get this thing set up, and hopefully we can see just how powerful this thing is. Well, so that fog machine was a little bit more powerful than I expected. That was a crazy amount of fog, and you saw I have this little inexpensive kind of air quality monitor. I brought that thing in here and the readings were off the chart as far as the PM 2.5, which is basically the small particles that are in the air. And so I decided to just go ahead and set up a time lapse, let this thing run for about 20 minutes, and it brought it down from that crazy level back to a normal level with no problem. So I think that just in and of itself is a testament to how well this thing works. You also might notice that I ended up getting a little adapter so I can use all of my DeWalt batteries with this Milwaukee fan as well. So if you guys don't already have a bunch of Milwaukee M18 batteries, these adapters are like 10 bucks on Amazon. I'll link to them below, along with everything else I use in this project. And so you can use other brands of batteries if you want. And of course, there is the option to use this corded. So I think for the next test, I'm just gonna do some kind of general woodworking, move the cart around the shop with me as I'm working, which is basically how I'm planning to use this thing. So, you know, make a couple of cuts on the table saw just to generate some sawdust and see how well this thing can clean up the air based on the readings from this air quality monitor. So even after making all those cuts on the table saw and miter saw, the PM 2.5 rating was only up to about 30, which is not bad at all. But as soon as I kicked the filter cart on, it dropped back down to 12 to 15. So I definitely think this thing is working really well. So if you want to build one of these carts for yourself, I'll have plans in the video description below. I'll also link to all the tools and materials I use in the video description below. And if you enjoyed this video, check out this other video of mine that YouTube thinks you'll like, and go ahead and get subscribed and ring the notification bell so you don't miss my future woodworking videos. All right, thanks for watching, y'all, and until next week, happy building.